How many people in our class, by a show of noise, have heard of CES? It's the biggest show on the planet and probably the only show that shuts down Vegas. Today we have a real heavyweight with us. We have Gary Shapiro, who is the president and CEO of the Consumer Technology Association, which is the U.S. trade association with more than 2,200 consumer tech companies and owns and produces CES. But more than that, Gary has spoken and testified before Congress probably on more than 20 occasions about a number of business and policy issues related to high-tech, innovation, entrepreneurship. In 2015, he was named one of the most influential lobbyists in Washington, D.C. He's also repeatedly named on top 100 lists in terms of key influencers. He literally drives policies that determine everything from job growth in the economy to the creation of technology standards. He has authored a number of books, best-selling book Ninja Innovation, 10 Killer Strategies for the World's Most Successful Businesses is on the screen right now. I believe he's going to talk to you a little bit about that. He's also authored more than 500 opinion pieces in publications ranging from Wall Street Journal to New York Times. He sits on the State Department's Advisory Committee on International Communications and Information Policy. If you're not going to find out about what it takes to make a successful startup or what this guy has seen in terms of the criticality of innovation to our future today, you will never. He's also probably judged more than 600 startup competitions, so he will happily share his advice about the good and bad and the ugly of everything that he's seen. His accomplishments are legion, but like many of our guests, I've asked him to talk about himself and his story today. So please think about what thoughtful questions you would like to ask him. He just came from a press conference in Paris where he had over 500 journalists throwing questions at him. Let's at least show him that in Michigan we can keep him on his toes. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm Friday welcome for Gary Shapiro.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. What an honor to be here. I have a great personal connection that I've yet to exercise until today with this university. My father went here, and my wife went here. And despite that, I actually am living, believe it or not, in Birmingham, Michigan, and commuting to Washington almost every week. So I am happy to be here. This is terrific. I've been gone the last 10 days in Europe, and I flew in yesterday. And it's great to wake up and come here and see students, which are probably the funnest audience for anyone who does a lot of speaking, because you're still curious, and you're willing to learn and listen, which is good. And you know, the thing is like we all have life experiences. And those life experiences shape who we are. And we always think that we're smarter than the people that are younger than us that do not have those life experiences. I remember thinking in junior high, being in 8th grade, and thinking, wow, those 7th graders, they don't know what's going on. Wait till they're in 8th grade. And that's how we go through life, is that we're just those that, it's what you've experienced. I grew up in New York. My father was a teacher. My mother sold things door to door and was also a teacher. I was talking to her about a lot this week because she was a French teacher. So I didn't want to have her lording over me, so I studied Spanish, and I regretted it this past week, spending a lot of time in France and not knowing what was going on because people were speaking French. But I grew up as a normal kid and went to a state university in New York, and I studied. But I realized one of the experiences that shaped me, just in retrospect, was in my first week at school, I really wanted to go to this movie that was being shown. And when I got there what I thought was early enough, and I found out that there was no line. Everyone kind of did their own thing, and even though I waited patiently, I never got to see the movie because I felt a lot of people had cut ahead of me. This is like a therapist couch. So I haven't talked about this publicly before. So what I did is I figured I would do something about it. I actually applied to be a house manager, and I got the job, so I started controlling lines, which sounds pretty weird. But I'd started out much younger, not with a lot of benefits. My father being an elementary school teacher, I remember doing factory piecework and shoveling snow and delivering newspapers. And I've always worked every week of my life since I've been about 14. And I really believe, I was a dishwasher. I remember being 16 years old and dishwashing and worked for 10 hours, and at 3 in the morning when it was done, the guy said, I'd like you to come back every day. You're a really good dishwasher. I said, I'm never coming back again. But the formulating time in my life was actually when I lied about who I was when I was about 14 or 15, and I pretended to be my older brother who was asked to come into a factory and do some work. And I was making lamps in a factory all day, and my father picked me up and he said, how was it? I said, Dad, I'm going to college. I am never doing this factory stuff again. And I still think about that because of how it motivated me in life. But not only that, how some of the issues that we're talking about in our presidential campaign actually play out. Because people believe that we could bring back manufacturing to the United States. And I think we can in some ways, but in a lot of ways we can. I've been to factories around the world, in Thailand and Vietnam and China and India. And let me tell you something, we do not want those jobs here. They are repetitive jobs where people work 50 or 60 hours a week doing the same thing over and over again. So my life has been a series of jobs, and I've done everything possible, including at a very young age, running a major restaurant with a well-known performer every night, and learned about how to motivate people and what to do. And from that, I didn't know what I was going to do, actually, but the truth is, I was running this restaurant, and this was before the days of a lot of laws affecting how we treat men and women and how you have to not have in a power relationship. I was dating the waitresses. I'm trying to say it politely, and it was legal then, and no one even talked about it. But I was managing 100 waiters and waitresses, and it was a lot of fun. But what I found I was doing late at night, because this thing went on, is because I was in a place with an open bar, I was drinking a lot every night. And I envisioned myself, actually, that I would become an alcoholic. So I realized, even though they'd offered me a job in what was the largest food service company in the country, and they offered to fly me as a college graduate to Hawaii, I decided that I would become an alcoholic if I stayed in food service. So I got out of it, because having an open bar available all the time was something that concerned me personally. So I ended up at the very last second, because I'd filled out all my applications for graduate school and law school. And I actually did apply for graduate school at the University of Michigan. But I was on everyone's waiting list. This was before computers, and I did everything by hand one day. I took the GREs, the GMATs, and the LSATs without any preparation, all within 5 weeks of each other, and I got the same score in every one with great scores, but having great scores and good, decent grades wasn't enough. So I was on everyone's waiting list, because I think my applications were so sloppy and incomplete without the great personal stories. But at the very last second, in mid-August, Georgetown accepted me into law school. And I had heard that Georgetown had a beautiful campus. So my father drove me and a friend of our family's, and on the way there, the friend of the family, this 6'2" lawyer, she said, the law school is like in the slums and the campus is 5 miles away. It's like, this is before the internet. You couldn't find this stuff out shortly. So I went to law school and I love law school. I love law school because it opened my mind. I never wanted to become a lawyer, but I always wanted to go to law school. And it was just sheer randomness that started me on my career with having that house manager background in college. And then I got there and I had no money. And I needed money to live. Macaroni and cheese was my food of choice throughout law school and college. But it was 4 for $1 then. Now it's $1 a piece. And I went to the Career Center, and the first job I could get, I took. And it wasn't a great career move intentionally, but it was a great career move. I got a job on Capitol Hill working for a member of Congress. And I was shocked. Me from a liberal school in New York, a conservative Republican from Oklahoma, I couldn't believe that people actually thought these things. But I worked for him, and he put me to work rewriting the Administrative Procedures Act, which is how a rule becomes a law in Washington. And I was lucky enough to enjoy it and do well at it. And from that, I got a higher paying job at a law firm as a second-year law student. And then as a third-year law student, I was there full-time. And there was a client I was working for that just loved me, and that was the association I work for now, believe it or not. And it was a small association at the time. But they asked me to go to this event in Chicago called the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which you heard about. And I said, I want this. I may be a lawyer, because I was, at that point, a lawyer working for the law firm. I wanted to work full-time because I saw excitement there. I saw something that still exhilarates me about trade shows, is that you have companies showing their products in a face-to-face marketing environment that's just absolutely exceptional. And it's a 5-sense experience because you see what they're doing. You're shaking hands with people. You could smell all the excitement of the place. Sometimes you're even tasting it, and of course you're touching it. And the companies are side by side, and they're competing fiercely. And they're, as companies, not through retailers, not through someone else, they're presenting their full image of what they want to the business world. And that just excited me. And there's format wars going on between VHS and beta, between DC. I'm really dating myself here, but there's all sorts of different. There were wars about whether you had what was in a video recorder, what kind of cameras would be out there. The shift to CD digital was just being introduced, and whether a CD really is better or not than a record. And a lot of people to this day believe that actually a compact disc is not as good as a record, because a record, analog, is continuous and flowing and rich, and digital is just sampling. And it's maybe 30,000 times a second, but it's still sampling. There's still debates that go on about this. But I fell in love with a trade show. And I still believe in it. You know, I am the paid cheerleader for over 2,000 technology companies in Washington. It's not only about policy and lobbying, it's about talking about the categories of products that are emerging. And they're emerging quickly. There's drones, there's 3D printing, there's biometrics, there's all sorts of stuff. There's robotics and nanotechnology. And if you think I'm walking back and forth on the stage just to show my intimacy with the audience, I am getting Fitbit points as I walk right now, so I am multitasking. So I was able to see this, and as a cheerleader, I talk about technology, and the truth is with technology, you don't really need to be here today. You can get this somehow online, I'm sure, and you don't need to go to a trade show. Maybe, I was told, every week someone's tried to sell me a virtual trade show. But the fact is that I am an advocate for the face-to-face live experience because it's still about human relationships. It's about being able to evaluate someone and talk to them and look them in the eye and shake their hand and see whether you want to trust that person or not. And of course you could do that online, and you could do it through all sorts of video chat and teleconference and FaceTime and Skype. But still we need the human experience, which I think is important. And that's a dichotomy which I've spent the last 3 decades talking about and dealing with, and I'm very comfortable with the importance of human beings, even though I know the next 30 years will be debates about robotics taking over the world and artificial intelligence and things like that. It won't happen. But from that law firm experience, I was offered a full-time job, and I was lucky because it was the beginning of the technology revolution. There was only a few categories of products then. But we embarked upon a strategy, and it's interesting. I'll never forget the first board meeting. Since this is a class on entrepreneurship, I want to I'll talk a little bit about business-to-business marketing events, also known as trade shows. I'll never forget I was able to attend as a lawyer, a young lawyer or a law student, the first board meeting of this 45-person board of CEOs from the technology world from around the world, literally globally. And at that point, the largest company exhibiting there was Panasonic, a Japanese company. And their CEO was there, and they were debating whether or not to charge more for exhibit space to exhibit. And he said something. He said, look, we're the largest company. The exhibit space cost is irrelevant to us. It's a rounding error. He said, frankly, we have to bring a lot of people. We have to construct a booth. It's a big deal. But exhibit space is nothing for us. But we have to make this trade show, so it's open up to anybody with an idea. So that someone in their garage or in their attic or basement coming up with something can expose it to the thousands of retailers, the investors, the partners, the journalists. And now we get 7,000 journalists to our show in Las Vegas every time. So they could determine, the free market can determine, not us, the big companies, whether the show this. So out of that, we have a philosophy in our organization. We're a nonprofit organization, that we exist for the cause of innovation. That is what we exist for. But we run our trade show for the smallest startup. And that's what we do. And that show now, we started something to really visualize that. Just a few years ago, just as an experiment, we called it Eureka Park. We wanted 30 startups there. And we ended up with 80. And that was 3 or 4 years ago. This show, we're going to have 600 startups there. And you know what? That's the most exciting portion of our show. Because we subsidize it. It's about $1,000 for someone to exhibit there. And really, it costs them more to have a hotel room, even if they're sharing, and get to Las Vegas. But they have 4 days, and in that 4 days, what they do, they're exposed to literally hundreds, if not thousands, because we had 178,000 business people attend our last event, and that's the most popular area. And if someone stops to talk to them, they will get feedback. And they will be exposed to the investors, and a lot of investment, they'll be exposed to Walmart and Best Buy and Amazon, anyone who buys major amounts of products. But not only them, their counterparts from around the world. Alibaba, for example, where I'll be speaking next week in China to the Alibaba executive management team and top customers. Major retailers and partnering. And what's changed dramatically just in, I'd say, 3 years is the mindset of corporate America, the largest companies. The CEOs, and I talked to them, they believe that it used to be they had to create things themselves. It's called a make or buy decision. Do they make it themselves or do they buy it or do they partner? And what they've decided actually is the best ideas are coming from the smallest companies and startups. And they have to partner and they have to figure out a way to be able to talk to people. And the startups, what they need is their first customer. They need revenue. And now there's marriages that are occurring. And the skill, and I'm going off on a little bit of a segue here, but the skills that now are being valued by large companies, in addition to technical skills, are the ability to work together collegially and reach across the silos of corporate America within companies and across industries and across companies. If you have different skill sets in different areas, you will be a desirable, if you want to get hired by a large company, although I know you're entrepreneurs. This is an entrepreneurship class. But the whole concept of entrepreneurship has changed dramatically in just the last 10 or 15 years because what we have is we have anyone with a broadband connection and a device can now start a global company overnight. And that's what happens. And it's also accumulation of wealth very quickly, which has raised a lot of policy questions that we're going to be dealing with. But technology has fundamentally changed who could be a startup and how it could happen. I had dinner on, believe it or not, Wednesday night with this 28-year-old kid who had written 3 books and was in charge of the president of a company investing tens of millions of dollars in startups. And his job was to get startups to the Paris region. And he told me that they had done research in 2002, and 3% of young French people wanted to have their own company. He said now it's 15%, which is a 5-fold increase in 10 years. It's kind of amazing. So the concept of entrepreneurship and starting your own companies is not just a U.S. phenomena. It's elsewhere as well, and that's what I see around the world. I visit a lot of startups and accelerators while I was in France this week, and they're passionate about it. And we even had our own event there in Paris on Tuesday where we had about 60 to 70 startups showing products. And what's changed also, though, and this is to bring it back to the CES and what it does, is it used to be we were all taught in classes like this one. And I don't want to refute anything that's been said by those that have a view on this, is that you have to create a business plan. You have to go out and analyze the marketplace. And you have to create this incredibly rich, strong document with a lot of research about the potential market and everything that could go wrong and your SWOT analysis and all that. And that's gone away, all of it. First of all, it takes a lot of time to do that. So the concept of entrepreneurship has evolved so that if you have an idea, then what you should do is come up with that idea and start testing it out with your potential customers, your buyers, investors, and partners. And that, by having that idea and listening and getting feedback, it'll make a difference. I was asked at the press event we had by one of the journalists there on Tuesday, what advice I give to the startups that are coming from France, because France will have 200 startups in Las Vegas. And my advice was this. It was, the obvious one is, because I told a number of startups there, that you have to be able to explain what you're doing in 30 seconds or less, the so-called elevator pitch. That's an easy one. You have to wear comfortable shoes. But you really have to listen and take the feedback, because you're going to leave in 4 days from that trade show with a totally different concept of what your business is from when you went in. And now we have 100% satisfaction among the startups that come to Eureka Park, because they always have come with ideas about how to do business with customers, with investors, with all sorts of different ways of looking at what they started with. And that's how you can get a start. Everything is about speed and getting things quickly to market. In fact, one of the, I'll shift into the policy area for 1 minute. One of the most devastating things that's affecting the generation of entrepreneurs in this room, or potential entrepreneurs, is actually that things have changed since you've started high school, I would say. And that now you can't get some of the experience or the opportunities you need to have your startup because of policies coming out of Washington. Washington has banned free internships, for example. And now, as of December 1st, unless Congress acts, there's a new law that will go into place that says, unless you are making about $48,000 per year, you must get overtime. Which means that if you were trying to create a company and hire your friend who's betting on the fact that you may do well and become very successful, you cannot send that person emails after a 35 or a 40-hour week unless you pay that person time and a half. This is devastating to the startup culture in America, and when I tell small businesses this is about to go into effect, they get upset. Now, we'll see what happens when Congress comes back after the election. There is a major effort to slow that down or to change it, but we'll see. But given that and the level of high debt, which is one thing we always talk about. So we run an association of 2,200 technology companies, but we're united by one thing, and that's a passionate view of innovation. And what we do is we do all sorts of things to promote innovation. We rank the states as to which has the best innovation policies, as we define them, which have the most STEM graduates, for example, is one of our criteria, who has the best broadband, all sorts of different ways of whether innovation, whether they welcome new business models. Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and Pandora and Travelocity and TripAdvisor and YouTube are members of ours. And they focus on their disruptive, we have something called the Disruptive Innovation Councils. They want to be able to do what they want to do without this government shutting them down, and it's increasingly difficult. New York City has just essentially banned Airbnb, for example. How many of you have used Airbnb? Show of hands. I'd say a good number. How many of you have used Uber or Lyft? Most of you, good. Yeah, it helped get me to the airport yesterday in Paris. Uber, it's great. You know, I used to have to rent cars, and now I don't. I get stuff done while someone else is driving. How many of you know your Uber rating? Very few of you. Nobody knows their Uber rating. Oh my God, you should know your Uber rating. You know, you're rating the driver. You know the driver's rating you? You should look at that. It's very difficult to figure out, but you could do it on your phone, and I'll show you later if you want to know how. I could talk a lot, and I have no idea how long because I can't.
You can talk for 5 more minutes if you'd like.
But
you're in a customer discovery friendly zone here, so you don't have to apologize for no business plans. Do you want to move into questions?
I'd like to go to questions because I could keep talking about a range of subjects and different things.
Well, okay. One thing before you're welcome to sit down. We're going to invite the IA out. So unless you want to keep getting your Fitbit stats, and then he can follow you.
I was pretty happy with my job in Washington, running a major trade association, one of the largest, and advocating for innovation and freedom. One of the biggest things was the freedom for companies in the technology world to build what they want to build. Because the challenge of government, in my view, is their natural inclination is to want to regulate anything new. You know, we see, and because they're pushed by existing businesses, existing taxi owners pushed to regulate Uber and Lyft, and the hotel industry has a huge organized campaign to shut down Airbnb, or as one was quoted in the Washington Post yesterday, we want to be able to keep our prices really high. I can't believe he said that. He said we can raise our prices now that we got Airbnb out of New York City. But our job is to make sure that we have the American dream, that anyone can start a business, and what makes America great, in my view, is we're different, I believe. And I know that's a discussion in presidential campaigns, but I was writing about this before this presidential campaign. What makes us great is the fact that we are an immigrant culture. We are the most diverse country in the world. You look around the audience, we all look different. You go to the Asian countries or even European, they look pretty much the same. And because of this diversity, we actually are very good at disagreeing with each other. We're good at coming up with new ideas. I remember going to a major Japanese company and sitting there and listening to their great product plan. This is one of the largest companies in the world, and this is the dumbest product I ever heard about. But yet everyone's shaking their head, and I said, this isn't going to work. I said, the consumers will not buy this. Oh, no, of course it did flop, but the point is they don't know how to disagree with each other. One of my major embarrassments, actually, that I think I talked about in one of the books, is Bill Gates was one who would come to our show, and I got to know him. And he was rehearsing his keynote speech, and I was the only non-Microsoft person in the room. And I thought what he was doing was pretty cool, the product, but I didn't like the way he was talking about some of the stuff. So I told this team, I said, look, he could improve his presentation in a number of ways, and I had a whole list. And they said, that's fine, but please tell Bill. And they were very nervous. Usually, like, you know, they just pass it along. So I go and I talk to Bill. I said, look, here's some things you can improve on. And he was fine with all the input. Most speakers want input. It's the biggest gift you could give anyone is feedback, even if they think they've done it a lot the way I have. I love when people give me input. But then I said something really stupid. I said, you know, that product introduction is going to be one of the coolest products ever introduced. And he thanked me. And then I found out almost immediately afterwards that actually the product was one that wasn't the normal Microsoft creation of a team. It was his girlfriend's product. And it was, nobody was able to criticize him or give him feedback. It was this dancing clip that taught you how to use a Microsoft.
The dancing paperclip. Yeah.
The dancing
yeah.
paperclip.
Was it called like Bob or something?
It was one of the biggest flops and most frustrating because you couldn't delete it. So even if you knew how to use the Microsoft programs, you couldn't get rid of it, and it became the biggest joke and annoyance, and it was a flop. So I'm telling you that, first of all, I'm trying to pretend I have humility to show you I was wrong once. That was funny. Okay. But second, actually, the truth is, really the lesson there is that you need honest feedback from people, and that's one of the problems if a guy's wife or girlfriend or husband or boyfriend, whatever, is the one who's determining things. People are not going to feel comfortable giving feedback, and that's where Microsoft really blew it big with that product. So how did I write a book? Well, bottom line is I met somebody who I fell in love with from Michigan, and I thought would follow me and move to my wonderful job in Washington 14 years ago because I get invited to the White House. I go to a lot of fun stuff. I meet really interesting people. But it turns out that she has a job she likes here. She's a doctor with a surgeon with a great practice, and she didn't want to start. So we ended up, honestly, commuting. Now, we didn't plan to have children, and somehow we ended up with a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old now. So I come here every week, almost every weekend. I come here on Friday. And by the way, that transition, though, was serendipitous and allowed me to actually have thinking time. So I was able to put my thoughts down and write articles, and I had ideas for a book, and it worked. The whole thing worked, actually, shockingly. There was no great plan. I do have New Year's resolutions every January 1st. And every one for 15 years has been write a book. I just didn't know what I was going to write about, but then I realized I should write about what I care about, and I care about free enterprise and entrepreneurship and innovation. And that's been most of what my writings have been about. And if you Google my name, you'll see that I've had, now it's 750 articles published in the last few years. One was just published today somewhere. And it's just my views of the world and how it should go. I've been pretty critical of most politicians. But I've also been very concerned about this generation that's in the room, because I think you're asleep at the switch and you should be protesting in the streets about what's going on with you. And I don't know how to, that's why one of my objectives in accepting this assignment or request was that I think you guys have great opportunity, but I also think you're not paying attention to what Washington is doing to your lives in a very negative way, and it's affecting you. In a very bad way. And it'll affect your future, because my generation has made promises to ourselves there's no way we could keep in terms financially. And it's all math. You can do the math. It's all there. You're going to be broke. And there's no money left for, if you take away interest payments and entitlements, there's no money even for defense or education or the environment or anything else. So part of me writing the book was because I was frustrated about that, and I'm trying to get a message across, and that's why I write a lot about it. But what's shocking is this, even in this presidential debate, there's no discussion really of any significance. I saw a chart of all the words, and it's like, 4 years ago, maybe 16 to 20% discussion was about the debt and the deficit, and here it's about 4%. So no one seems to care, which is a shame, because your kids will care, and you're going to care when you're older.
Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to depress you.
It's kind of heavy.
I feel personal.
I'm sort of looking at the bananas to bring us all back up.
So one of the things we do is we focus on innovation, and I'm a lobbying group, and I'm, although I'm not a registered lobbyist because I don't have to be, we never ask the government for any money, not one penny ever. We just don't. The closest we'll do is we might advocate for money for STEM higher education. But we don't ask the money for our industry, and I've gotten members of Congress pretty angry at me that they were trying to throw money at us and we wouldn't take it. And that's just a basic principle, because we consider the biggest threat to our economy, to our future and your future, is the deficit. Not the annual deficit, which is spiked the first year of the Obama administration. It's gone down just a tad. But the debt, which is the accumulation over time. It's really high.
I'm going to let the first question be from the stage while I pass the mic into the middle of the room.
Okay. All right, I'll make it better, happier.
No, if it's not happy for you,
it's not happy for me.
be you. Go ahead.
So you're talking about a lot of different policies and stuff. So what policies would you put into place to make the business environment in the U.S. better?
Really easy. So I think the business environment is challenging because how many of you want to be a lawyer? Good. I didn't see one hand. So the U.S. is the most lawyers per capita. I mean, no one even comes close anywhere else in the world. And we have some of the smartest people, sadly, go to law school. And it's a occupation which basically doesn't expand the pie. It just cuts out and takes a vig. Front page of the Wall Street Journal today. You should read it. Oh, my God. It's a story about these lawyers. They buy up old patents, and they just sue thousands of startups and small businesses and internet sites, and they extort money from them. Lawyers are basically, you know, I was talking to the senior government officials from the different parties in France, and they have a really interesting election. They have their issues. You know, they have very strong unions and stagnancy, and it's difficult to do things in France. But we have lawyers, and lawyers are destroying American society, and there's too many of them, and we don't need as many. I think we want to, instead of fighting wars with guns, we should just export lawyers to other countries we don't like. So, number one, I would, and the way I would do this, by the way, is I have a very, you know, I imagine some of you supported Bernie Sanders just by your demographic. The concept of free college tuition bothers me enormously. But the concept of having college tuition and loans based on what the major is a great idea. So I would have, if you want to be a lawyer, you take out a 15% loan. If you want to be an art history major, just to insult art history majors, you know, you have a 10 or 15% because there's no real jobs there. But if you want to be a scientist or an engineer or a software developer or a data scientist, or go into biology or health or medicine, you get a 0% loan. That's the biggest change I make. We're promiscuous in how we give out student loans. So I do that. And I would also get rid of the choking regulation, which is just unbelievable. I think if you challenge business, you will come up with answers to solutions what the business will do. But you have to challenge it. I think the challenge is there's so many rules and regulations today that a lot of business leaders think if you follow the rules and regulations, you're ethical. When the reality is there is a separate set of ethics outside the rules and regulations. I mean, I've walked across streets late at night that had a do not walk sign. I don't think it's wrong. It's so, you know, you have to be able to have form. You can't let the law define your ethics and vice versa. And because we have so many rules and laws, I think business people have made a mistake and they're allowing the laws to define their ethics. So if we said this is the result we want, get us there. So here's an example of what we did that I'm proud of. We took all the people who make these devices and sat in a room. Apple, Samsung, Google, Fitbit, Misfit. And we said, privacy is an important issue for consumers. Let's agree among ourselves rather than have the government tell us what to do. And it didn't take a lot. We agreed that you had to have policies, make them simple, understandable language. You had to make them transparent. You had to make sure you inform consumers if you're going to, and had them opt in, and that if you're going to sell their information or share it with others, and you have to allow consumers to opt out. This is not rocket science. But yet now, and this is a complaint I was hearing from one of the top French people, is what do? You go on a website, you want to get to a website, you click that you're agreeing to things that you'll never read. And if you try to read, which I've tried a couple of times, and I used to be a lawyer, you can't figure out what they're saying. So we've gotten off the rails here in terms of lawyers as a country, and that's the bottom line. We need fewer rules, we need to challenge business, we need to talk about ethics as more of an important thing, and then things, and it's the same thing, like what we were talking earlier, talking with the dean about self-driving cars. How do we get to self-driving cars? There's so many issues. Well, you have to challenge people and set a big goal. The next president should get up there and say, I want to cut the highway deaths 90% by the year 2025. And business and government work together to make it happen. That's what we did. I was involved with a high-definition TV transition, going from analog to digital. That's what we did. We had a goal, and we worked towards it in a bipartisan way. I was involved with the transition of the internet it used to be you couldn't do business on the internet. It was considered really bad form. But we wanted to do business on the internet. So we said, how do we get there? How do you make a signature binding? How do you send out documents? How do you do a contract? How do you make something happen? Which was, to me, my next book. Make something happen. My advice to you is if you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to do things, you can make something happen. People aren't going to do it for you. You just have to figure out to get to the result. And as I say to our employees, you want to get ahead? Don't come to me with a problem. Come to me with a situation where there's potential solutions, and let's discuss different things. And that's how you get ahead in any job, frankly. You figure out what your boss is worried about, and you solve problems. You don't create new problems for your boss. It's really easy to get promoted if that's what you want. Is you just start thinking outside the box and do things. And that's what I'll come back to. That's what we're good as Americans. That's our culture. We lament the fact that our schools stink. I don't think our schools stink. I think we ask why a lot. We ask why not. We're natural entrepreneurs. We have lemonade stands. I've had a series of Chinese women living in our home because my wife insists our kids learn Mandarin. And they have no clue about how to create or do anything. We have 300,000 students from China, and I don't mean to insult anyone who knows. They're in the US now more than all the other countries combined because they've determined in China that they want to be innovative like the US, but they don't have the culture for it. In their 5-year plan, they have the number of patents they want to have per 10,000 people. But they realize they're a copying culture, and they lack the ability to think. And we teach our kids to think. We teach it because of our immigrant environment, our diversity, our First Amendment, which allows us to do things and say things without the government cutting us down. And we do it because we reward and we welcome failure here. No other country in the world, with the possible exception of Israel and maybe Canada, will say that if you start a business and you fail, that's a sign of education and achievement. When I hire people, I don't want the rich kid that went to private schools and Ivy League universities. I want somebody who started out and failed and did something, or started a company, was an entrepreneur and failed and learned something. Because when you're an entrepreneur, you have to do everything. You get judgment. And why does it? I spent some time in Israel. I go there every year. And talking about why Israel's so successful. I mean, they have it very similar with the immigrant environment, and they're surrounded by people who want to kill them. Starting a business, what's the big deal, you know? So you fail, you learn something. They have 20 and 20-year-olds. You must serve in the Israeli military. You're managing millions of dollars worth of equipment in people's lives. What's the big deal about starting a business, frankly? So I think Israel and the U.S. have a lot in common in that they're very diverse, free market, and entrepreneurial. But we have different ways of getting to that path of success of being the most innovative countries in the world. And now France and others everyone's trying to emulate us. And it's not just Silicon Valley. That's another myth I spend going around the world talking about. There's pockets of entrepreneurship and innovation everywhere. Michigan is great, actually. Just what's going on this campus is phenomenal. So we could do it and we can make it happen here, but we have to, what is government? Government should not be the barrier. Every time there's something new like drones or robots or self-driving cars or Airbnb, or they shouldn't be in the way of that. They should figure out what's the safety and health issue, challenge business to resolve it, and what do we have to do to get there? Not what do we have to do to save those existing businesses which are going to be put out of business. And this is going to be a big issue with self-driving cars. You know, millions of people have jobs in that world. But the question for us should be, how do we get to the result of fewer lives? And the public policy discussion is going to be, how many jobs equal one life? Because there's going to be a lot of people displaced. And there's the insurance companies which aren't going to make money, and tow truck drivers, and collision repair shops, and emergency room physicians, and things like that. It'll be a better world, and that's what we're doing with technology and innovation. And that's why I wake up every day and I love my job, because our whole focus is to make the world better. We're going to be healthier. We're going to have predictive intelligence. We're going to know when people are going to get sick. We're going to be correlating disease and behavior and food and drugs. We're going to have all sorts of the vision of Obamacare of healthy people with information will be realized through technology, not necessarily through electronic medical records, but the sharing of information. We're going to have a much better human condition in the future because of technology and innovation, and it's up to entrepreneurs to unleash that. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Earlier, were you suggesting that business plans aren't as necessary anymore, and if so, would you mind clarifying what it is you suggest to do instead?
I'm sorry, I missed one word in a business what?
Were you...
Oh, no, I mean, when I say business plans, of course you should have like 2 or 3 pages to lay out what you're going to do and how, but I'm sorry if I counter anything you're being taught here, but this is just my view.
No. We're not you're safe. You're not at Ross right now.
Right.
So, no, we are firm advocates of customer discovery.
But what it used to be and what was taught was you have to create a business plan, which is a very lengthy document. and you do all this research and a lot of brainstorming in different scenarios, and you figure out what your weaknesses, your strengths, you analyze the competition, you analyze the industry, you do all this, I mean, it takes 6 months to a year to even 2 years, and then you would go forward. You know what, by that time, some of your competitors come up with the idea and execute on it. So right now, what there's a premium for is speed. Because there's a phenomenal number of good ideas, but execution and making it happen is what the distinguisher. I've judged so many startup contests, I've seen so many things, and I'm not to be cynical about it, but speed matters. That's why I'm so upset about this new Labor Department rule that says everything's about overtime. That's insanity. We're competing on a global basis now. We're not competing with the guy next door anymore. We're competing globally as to who can get a product or an idea or an app to market. So you got to do it fast, and you got to. One thing we're good at as Americans, especially, is we're hard workers. And look, people should be paid whatever they want to be paid. And if they don't like it, get a job elsewhere. But some people want to be paid based on future equity or something like that, or based on a promise. And if we're killing a startup culture by requiring the startups pay everyone overtime, that's crazy. In terms of the business plan concept, what I do, I used to do business plans. I don't do that anymore. I have like a 2 or 3 page document that lays out my goals for the next 5 years. Big goals. I have an annual, I don't even have an operating plan. I have a budget. What I have is I have every employee on incentive compensation. That's where it matters. And we get a cross-departmental team of all sorts of level of employees. We sit down every year and say, what do we want our incentive compensation goals to be? We end up with 25 SMART goals, specific, measurable, obtainable, realistic, with a timetable. In other words, you can't bullshit them. And you know what? Everyone plays to those goals because everyone wants extra money. So we work together, and they're all tied into these, the goals we have as an organization. Now, we have an organization that's phenomenally successful. We're a $100 million organization. We're doing very well. We're spending a lot of money and doing a lot of things. And we could do projects in any area we want almost because we have the revenue to do it. And let me tell you something in life. It's a lot more fun to love your job than to hate your job. And it's a lot more fun, you'll more likely love your job if it's part of a growing organization rather than a shrinking organization. I've been, because there's still a business cycle and there's recessions, I've been part of shrinking organizations. And I've had to cut a lot of money from budgets. And the worst thing is, people say CEOs shouldn't be paid a lot of money. The toughest thing to do is to fire someone, not for cause, but because you don't have the money to keep them. Because you're shaping that person's life tremendously. You're ruining their life in some cases. On the other hand, it's the most defining, I've been fired, it's the most defining experience you could have, and it makes you better. No pain, no gain. And, all right, I'm here. Okay.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to thank you because as somebody who's from the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, having somebody actually talk about what makes good financial sense is something that you rarely hear. So that's, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I know for a bunch of the people in this room, and a bunch of the engineers, we're focusing on autonomous vehicles. And so, I appreciate the whole idea of deregulation and allowing companies to dictate how to police themselves. But how are you protecting consumers, especially with autonomous vehicles? A Galaxy S7 can burn your pocket, but a Tesla crashes and it kills somebody. So,
that's a great question. So how do you protect consumers with self-driving cars? I call them self-driving because that's what I think people understand. We've done consumer research, that's what they understand. And it actually is. I always go for simple words rather than complex ones as a general, as we say. We have a document called Gary's Guidelines in my office for writing and speaking. So I just use simple words. So self-driving. The government role is very important for safety and health, and I think that's what's really important, and that's what we should be focusing on in terms of government more than anything else. In terms of safety, though, I want to dispel this myth that self-driving cars are going to end all deaths from vehicle collisions. They're not. There's going to be extreme weather. There's going to be systems, if they're mechanical, they'll break down. Cameras will break. Rocks will hit cars and knock things out. So you can't let the great be the enemy of the good. In the United States, we had last year 35,000 people died. The year before was 30,000. Bad trend line. In China, I learned today, it was 200,000 people died. We got to cut that number down. And we got to get there. So how do you allow a company? Well, with big companies, frankly, the laws are pretty clear that if you do something stupid, you're going to be sued out of your pretty hard. I mean, GM barely survived this ignition key thing, and I give a lot of credit to Mary Barra for navigating that, and they're still around. Larger companies, that's not going to be an issue. For a startup, yeah, and that's what the federal government's, and I can spend a lot of time talking, that's what they're struggling with now, is how the proposal that just came out of the federal government is that every model change, every software change must be approved by the federal government, and the model they even say they're using is what they do with airplanes, which take 11 years. That's not going to happen. And you can't create, and if you create the barrier too high, you won't allow startups in. You won't allow entrepreneurs in. But that isn't, and that's what we've done with our drug industry. The drug industry is very difficult for a startup company. So it takes a very long time in the United States to get a drug, and then the drug company does it because they can charge whatever they want in the U.S. and our federal government. That's another change I make. Don't give drug companies free rein to set prices if the taxpayer is paying the money. Prices don't matter in drugs in the United States. We're the only country in the world. We spend a lot of your future money just giving it away to drug companies, and we shouldn't. It's crazy. And you incentivize doctors to use the most expensive drug treatments possible. And we give them cash for doing it in all sorts of different ways in terms of how they're paid. So we shouldn't be doing stupid things like that. But in terms of protecting safety, that's the easy bar for government. Protecting competition from existing companies, no, we shouldn't be doing that. And not only that, in the car example, we should be having an aftermarket solution. So we can't wait for the entire fleet to turn over 15 years before we start saving lives. We have to start fixing cars that are out there in the marketplace now and make sure they're upgradable so we could start saving lives. Every year we get to full implementation, we save 30,000 lives. That's pretty good.
Gary,
I don't know if that answered the question. But.
We are out of time. Will you say something optimistic before these kids that have just been told they're screwed and lawyers are bad go back out into the world today?
No, I wish I was you, because you are living in a time in history which is the biggest change in time ever. What you'll see in the next couple of years, and you'll see it beginning in January at CES in Las Vegas, is phenomenal changes in technology. That are changing the human condition. And it's also the best time in the world to be an entrepreneur and a startup. You could do it. It's just a matter of if you have a good idea and you're willing to work hard and execute on it. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Let's hear it for Gary.
It's yours. Sorry, I didn't ask any questions.
You started fabricating bikes when you were 12, is that correct?
Not actually bikes when I was 12, but I started in my father's steel business when I was 12. So I started kind of honing my skill set from a mechanical standpoint, but nowhere near on the creative level of the bikes.
So my